Hello everybody, today I will read an article which is called Two Ideas about Europe. A few days ago I participated in a meeting entitled Your Idea to Change Europe. I took the opportunity to intervene, and like every time I intend to intervene, I have written down what I wanted to say. I'm not able to say a speech by heart, I'm not a good speaker. So I wrote the speech, but the effort was frustrated miserably. I had been assured that I would have from 5 to 10 minutes. My speech was of 9, perfect therefore, but in fact I was stopped at the end of the 5th minute. My speech then remained truncated, and I felt like a fool. And so, in order not to make the effort completely vain, I decided to read an article. Some of the things that I will say are partly a repetition of what I've already written some time ago about Europe, but this did not seem to me a sufficient reason to dissuade me from rewriting that intervention with some substantial change. Let's start. I'm a progressive and a pro-European. I find aberrant those dialectics of those who, especially in the populist right, propose to smash the European project and are waving nationalism and wearing the clumsy paraments of pretended cultural, historical, or even worse, religious particularities. But at the same time, I find it highly dangerous that in the face of so profound a discomfort with respect to a European project, which highlights great difficulties, one refuses to ask questions, to criticize, and to make proposals to correct it, to give it new vigor. The pro-European camp has in fact renounced criticizing the current European Union for fear of hurting it, of questioning it in its entirety. Here is a first thing wrong among the Euro enthusiasts. We divided the field in two factions: those in favor of the European Union, who have a blind faith in the project, even beyond the numerous and obvious missteps committed, and the Eurosceptics, on the other hand, who want to destroy Europe from its foundations. The artifact dichotomy has the enormous defect of labeling every attack on the European structure as an unpopular, senseless, wicked act. Just to give an example, until a few years ago, Alexis Tsipras was pointed out as the left populist threat to the European project, but then became, for some convert of the last hour, a reference point of Europeanism like Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron. This is unbelievable, right? In other words, Europeanism, whether progressive or conservative, instead of coldly and impartially assessing the many criticisms in these dramatic years, has branded all of them as heresies and its bearers as heretics, with the excommunication of unreliability and populism, systematically. And what is the result today? We have it under our eyes by repressing the voices of dissent and discomfort. Today, far-right parties steadily rise in every country because they have managed to turn those voices into consensus. Parties eager to redesign our liberal democracies in more authoritarian terms. The Front National in France, Alternative für Deutschland in Germany, Freiheitliche Partei Österreich in Austria, Golden Dawn in Greece, and etc. Let's say the truth. The European Union has faced two major crises. The economic one, it would be better to say financial one, of Greece and of the other countries named pigs, and the migration crisis of war refugees, and not only. And in both cases, the European Union has failed completely. And if in the case of the failure of the immigration policy, one can perhaps discount something to the European Union, given the various selfishness of the member countries, with respect to the financial crisis and the disgusting and unjust policies of austerity, there has been a guilty agreement between the European institutions and the various prime ministers of the most important countries. It is new of a few days ago that the hawk Jeroen Dijsselbloem, former president of the European Commission and the board of the European Stability Mechanism, expressed his regret regarding the management of the Greek crisis. It is an affordable affirmation, but terribly belated. The economic disaster has already been consummated, and who today speaks of recovery for the Hellenic country is either naive or mischievous. Among the failures of the European Union, I could also mention the reaction to the limit of anger and revengefulness towards the United Kingdom in the wake of the vote on the permanence referendum held in 2016, or the reaction to the vote of the Greek referendum of the year before against the new austerity measures. As far as I'm concerned, the European Union has shown in both cases a serious lack of respect for democratic processes. I am afraid that for someone this is perfectly acceptable, perhaps convinced that some voters are intelligent and others are stupid instead, and that therefore on certain issues it would be preferable not to vote, as it has been done with the Lisbon Treaty, which has welcomed many of the innovations of the European constitutions which had been rejected by the French and Dutch referendums in 2005. But merely pointing out the errors and flaws of the current European architecture would be idle and otherwise off topic. Let's move instead to two ideas to change the European Union, one in negative, the other in positive. Negative proposal. Let us abandon the project to create the United States of Europe. Why? Not because of the cultural, historical, or religious differences among the various member countries, as it could be said by the typical exponent of a nationalist right party, not aware of the vagueness, flexibility, and changeability of the concepts of culture, history, and religion. As a progressive with a certain sensitivity to foreign languages, I say just for a purely linguistic reason, which is linked to the democratic question. How can we believe that a democracy can really come true in a hyperstate of 500 million people who speak 24 different languages? How can we expect that future European citizens will be able to vote for a president whom they will not very likely understand except through translations, or who will be forced to speak a language other than his mother tongue? How can we believe that the future European citizens will feel part of the same state, since, in most cases, they will be not able to understand each other as soon as they cross the borders of their former national states, or when, in more fortunate case, they will be able to barely converse in a foreign language of complex and articulate political themes. The democracy of a great country is also based on a common linguistic base. And if now someone opposes Belgium or Switzerland, I remind that the first is a small country of 11 million people, in which only 2 languages are spoken. The German community is strongly minoritarian and is sometimes shaken by the strong separatist movements, while the second is a country of 7 million people, in which a form of direct democracy is practiced and which, I note, has never had any intention and never will to be part of the European project. As it perhaps escaped us that in the United States of America all citizens speak English, or that in India, despite the 22 recognized languages, Hindi and English are languages practiced by almost the entire population, it is not true that democracy is also based on the fact that different people can talk freely about politics, and that they are not able to do so if they do not share in-depth knowledge of the same language? And what about the connection between democracy and information? It does not seem at least unusual that in the hypothetical United States of Europe, citizens will actually be able to access only to the sources of information in their own language, and that the Germans will continue to read the Süddeutsche Zeitung, while the Greeks the daily Kathimerini. And what about political satire, also one of the many prerequisites of a healthy democracy? The French will read Charlie Hebdo, the Danes Gilles and Paston. Language is inseparably linked to the good functioning of liberal democracies, and that in the European Union 24 different languages are spoken is an unavoidable obstacle to the formation of an hyperstate that wants to define itself as fully democratic. That said, if we really want to save the European Union, paradoxically it is necessary to stop the integration process and to recover the spirit of collaboration and solidarity that has lifted the continent of Europe in the aftermath of the Second World War and has so admirably assured peace, prosperity and progress. The spirit that, to be clear, has animated the European treaties from the 50s to the 80s. The brilliant idea that the free circulation of people, of goods, of students would have triggered a virtuous circle of material and immaterial growth has freedoms and individual rights. And if something has remained today of that spirit so far cited, I trace it in the opening to the countries of the East, such as Poland, Czech Republic, Romania and Bulgaria. An opening that has contributed so much to the extraordinary growth of the last few years and to the improvement of the levels of transparency and protections of right, albeit with some incidents from time to time, of course. In 2016, a free trade agreement entered into force between the European Union and Georgia. Good news. Why not extend such an agreement to Armenia and Azerbaijan and seek surreptitiously to contribute to a solution to the conflict that involves the two countries for the Nagorno-Karabakh dispute? Why not extend free trade or some form of participation in the European Union to the countries of the former Yugoslavia or to the Maghreb countries such as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco? Why not try again to involve Turkey, which, since it has been isolated from Europe, has seen the democratic order precipitate very quickly in favor of a warring authoritarianism with Islamist nuances? Perhaps the eastern and southern coasts of the Mediterranean Sea are not part of the history and culture of Europe? Here then is my positive proposal: to rediscover the collaboration and solidarity approach that has made the economies of the countries involved in the first European integration processes explode, and which has allowed the progress of democratic mechanisms and the welfare state. Who knows? Maybe if in the early 70s Italy found itself to be the only democratic country in Southern Europe, one reason for this is also the fact that Italy was inside Europe, whilst Portugal, Spain and Greece were outside it instead. Those first European agreements teach us that economic prosperity is a necessary condition, a prerequisite for peace, democracy, secularism, and progress in the field of rights. It seems we have forgotten that lesson, and that the closure of the European Union to many of our neighbours seems to be an evident confirmation. My idea of Europe is an open and inclusive space made up of countries that participate freely with enthusiasm and responsibility, a space that shares the principles of freedom, democracy and collaboration, a space that promotes economic growth and the flourishing of humanistic, scientific and technical studies, a space that guarantees the strong ones to prosper and thrive and the weak to have opportunities and protections, a space with high levels of education and healthcare accessible to all, a space that is a beacon of hope for a world that here and there, even in the heart of Europe, persists in denying the universal values of freedom and justice. That's it. Thank you. That's all. Ciao.